Page 102 continued. Para. Even the members of the ruling clan did not hold a privileged position in regard to land ownership. As time passed, Gurjara cultivators were also absorbed in the feudal setup. They were made to pay all the dues which the local peasants had to pay. This is evident from a religious grant made in 960 by a feudatory who belonged to the Gurjara Pratihara line, footnote 37. The village, which was endowed out of his personal estate, Vangsa Potaka Bhoga, was inhabited by a considerable number of Gurjara cultivators, 38. Since the grantee, in this case a guru bracket, and his successive disciples bracket closed comma, was empowered to collect from the villagers half a dozen taxes, such as a share of the produce, bhaga, imposition on the threshing floor, khala bhiksha, officers' dues, prasthaka, skandhaka, Marganaka, resumption of property or on failure of issue. A-putrika-dhana, nasti-bharta, fees on deposits, nidhi, nidhana, along with all the other miscellaneous dues, proper and improper. Uchit, Anuchita 39. These must have been imposed on the Gurjaras first by their kinsman, overlord, and then by the Guru. The present grant shows clearly that the vassal treated his fellow tribesmen as tools meant for his personal enjoyment and as tillers attached to the soil capable of being transferred along with it. Further, the grantee could burden the peasants with fair and unfair taxes which reduced them to the position of serfs. Thus, feudal relationships developed not only between the Gurjara Pratiharas and the conquered population but also within the fold of the conquering tribe itself. For the conquerors regarded their kith and kin not as their equals entitled to an equal share in their spoils, but as semi-serfs working for the benefit of their erstwhile tribal leaders. Page 103. Para. There are other indications that in Rajasthan the people who cultivated the land did not have any say in its transfer and that the tillers could not leave the soil in case of transfer. On the one hand, the beneficiary was given the right of eviction. On the other, the peasants were required to stick to the soil in case of its transfer. The two provisions appeared to be contradictory so far as the peasants are concerned, but they clearly served the interests of the beneficiaries who enjoyed the discretion of removing or retaining the tenants. The common stone inscription of about 905 to 6 from the former state of Bharatpur, which formed a part of the Pratihara kingdom, certainly under Bhoja I, records 8 endowments dating from 786 to 87 to 905 to 6 in favor of the local deity Shiva. 40. Of these documents, number 6 registers that in the village enjoyed by him, a person named Untata, Untata, piously donated 3 plough measures of land which had been previously cultivated by the Brahmanas Sahulla, Jajja and others, but at the time of gift was cultivated by a ploughman called Eduvaka. 41. This record shows that sometimes even members of the highest Varna had to work as ordinary cultivators. What makes it more significant is the fact that even a vassal enjoying a single village could transfer land to others along with the plowmen, halikas who worked on it, and he did not have to obtain permission from his overlord. This instance proves the existence of serfdom in parts of Rajasthan under the Pratiharas. Since ordinary feudatories could make over the husbandmen along with the crown, the practice may have been fairly widespread. Para. Another factor which reduced the peasants to a state of serfdom was the extension of the practice of forced labor. The term visti, V-I-S-T-I, which means impressed labor, is not mentioned in the Pala grants. However, in the Pala kingdom, the peasants were subjected to Sarvapira, 42, which the king relinquished in the villages made over to the Brahmanas, temples and monasteries, 43. Whether oppressions were perpetrated on the villagers by the grantees who took the place of the grantors is not clear. Para. The Pratihara feudatories in eastern Kathiawar had undoubtedly the right to levy forced labor from the villagers. Page 104. This was known as Visti and was a privilege which went with the land grant. 44. The practice spread under the Maitrakas of Balavi in western India and continued in subsequent times in both Pratihara and Rashtrakuta dominions. The term Sota Padya Mana Vishtika, quote, produces following from forced labor, unquote, or, quote, forced labor on as occasion might arise, unquote, comma, first used in the Maitraka charters, was directly borrowed by the Rashtrakutas, 45. In fact, in no area and in no period does forced labor seem to have been as extensive as it was in Gujarat and Maharashtra under the Pratiharas and the Rashtrakutas. Surprisingly enough, it prevailed precisely in the areas in which the Donis were granted the right to cultivate the land, to get it cultivated, to enjoy it, and to get it enjoyed. Forced labor presupposes lack of manpower, for we cannot think in terms of coercion in areas which are thickly populated. Whatever might be the reasons for the prevalence of forced labor, it did obtain on a considerable scale. It does not, however, seem to have been a substitute for various kinds of royal revenues which are enumerated in detail in the Rashtrakuta charters. Probably it supplemented them by providing labor for the construction of forts, etc., as can be inferred from Bhattaswamin's explanation of the term Visti used in the Arthashastra of Kautilya, 46. It is not clear whether the grantees, like the feudal lords of Europe, exacted forced labor and compelled the peasants to work in the plots under their direct cultivation, empowered as they were to cultivate the village, or whether they continued to utilize their services for works which may be regarded as public in nature. Thus, we cannot decide the precise implications of the prevalence of forced labor, Uttapadya Manavisti, under the grantees. At any rate, the beneficiaries under the Rashtrakutas were granted the positive right of levying forced labor from the villagers. Those under the Palas were granted the negative right of having villages free from all oppressions, but whether they were authorized to indulge in these oppressions themselves is left vague. Para. We have no means of determining whether the direct burden on the peasants increased under the Palas and Pratiharas, but the formidable list of taxes imposed on them under the Gaharvalas creates this impression. Since the Pala grants specify only a few taxes, page 105, the rest being covered by the term Adi, within bracket, etc., 47, they leave clear room for the imposition by the grantees of fresh taxes on the villagers. They repeatedly refer to the obligation of paying all dues, samasta pratyaya, by the villagers to the grantees, but in the absence of the mention of these dues, they could be multiplied and increased by the beneficiaries. The same consideration applies to the Pratihara grants, which transferred all sources of revenue, Sarvasya Sameta, but did not name them. In some parts of the Pratihara kingdom in Rajasthan, the villagers were asked to pay proper and improper, fixed and not fixed dues to the grantees, 48. Thus empowered, the grantees could levy from the villagers taxes other than those which were customary, para. In contrast to the Pala and Pratihara grants, their Rashtrakuta counterparts show precision in transferring revenues and do not leave any scope for increasing the customary dues or charging any additional dues on the part of the grantee. But the beneficial effect of this definition is encountered by the imposition of at least 7 to 8 varieties of taxes on the villagers. These are Udranga Kama, Uparikara Kama, Bhuta Bhata Pratyaya Kama, Dhanya Kama, Hiranya Kama, Dandadas dash Aparadha Kama, and of course Upadhyamana Visti. Whatever these terms might mean in concrete terms, surely each one of them stands for a tax, and all taken together are indicative of the heavy burdens imposed on the Rashtrakuta peasants, who continued to pay all these dues even when the villages were transferred to the Donis, although the latter did not have the same freedom of action as those under the Palas and Pratiharas. Para. Thus, under the grantees, the villagers not only suffered from loss of traditional agrarian rights, but also from sub-infeudation and subleasing, subleasing, eviction leading to insecure tenancy rights, imposition of forced labor, levy of additional taxes, and forcible attachment to the ground. In some areas, the beneficiary was empowered to evict the peasants as well as to make them stick to the soil. The two provisions sound contradictory in relation to the peasants, but they clearly served the interest of the Donis, who were left free to remove or retain the tenants. All these factors rendered the economic subjection of peasants, page 106, in benefices as complete as that of their European counterparts, para. What strikes us forcibly about the grants is the absence of any legal method or machinery by which the peasants could secure redress of their grievances against the grantees. Almost all Pala and Pratihara grants enjoin the villagers to fulfill their obligations towards the grantees by paying them all dues and carrying out their orders. They also instruct the royal successors and other potential violators of the grants to observe the terms and conditions under the threat of damning spiritual consequences. That this actually worked in practice is evident from the restoration by Bhoja of two Agrahara villages which had slipped from the grasp of the grantees under his predecessors. But we have no trace whatsoever of any obligation of the grantees towards the villagers who were placed under their control. If they chose to levy new taxes or enhance the existing ones, where could the peasants seek relief? Naturally, if the grantees adopted oppressive measures, the villagers might be thrown into a state of helplessness, leading to their greater subjection. Para. In villages independent of temporal 49 and religious grants, taxes were assessed and realized by royal officials. We do not know whether the royal officials exacted any dues for their own maintenance from the peasants, but certain dues were levied from the villagers for the maintenance of the royal family under the Palas. In any case, the regular and irregular soldiers and policemen supplemented their earnings with the provisions supplied by the villagers. Otherwise, there could be no point in exempting the benefices from the entry of such royal agents. As old as the time of the Guptas, the belating of chatters, CATS, and bhattas on the villages covered Bengal, Bihar, Bundelkhand, and Chamba during our period. We do not have any precise idea of its operation in earlier times, but what we know of the implications of the entry of the charters and bhattas from a record of Chamba 975 shows that villages under the direct control of the king in other parts of the country may also have suffered heavily from the exactions of these royal retainers. The Chamba inscription shows that the charters and bhattas could enter the house of a peasant, appropriate a portion of raw and ripe crops, sugarcane, salt, and cow's milk, page 107. Carry off stools, benches, or carts, and seize his wood, fuel, grass, chaff, etc. 50. There is no reason to believe that they behaved otherwise in other areas. Para. Feudalization of trade and commerce was an important development in the economy under the Palas and Pratiharas. The markets attached to 4 villages were made over under Dharmapala to a grantee, 51, who would not allow as much of a free hand to the traders as the state would do. Several such instances are found under the Pratiharas. The most prominent example is that of about 34 horse dealers who, assembling from different parts of the country of Pehua, promised to pay a fixed sum of 2 dramas, TRAMMAS, on the sale of every horse, mule, etc. to 6 temples, 52. It is not clear whether the horse dealers paid the king any customs over and above what they paid to the temples. This might suggest that customs were transferred to the gods under royal pressure. Again, Undabhata, the governor of Siadoni, made over a fixed part of the customs levied on goods to the temple of Vishnu, 53. Similarly, incomes from at least 16 shops were allotted by several merchants to the temple of Vishnu at the same place, 54. A land grant made to the temple of Lachukeshwara in Rajasthan carried with it the levy of 3 Vimshopakas, VIMSOPAKAS, on every sack of grain brought for sale in the market, and 2 Vimsopakas per mensem from every shop. 56. I think it's 55. In the Rashtrakuta dominions, grants of royal income from crafts are not recorded, but local guilds granted their income for religious purposes. Thus, in 793, the headman of a guild of weavers at Laxmeshwar agreed to make a contribution of the proportionate quantity of the goods turned out by the weavers for a religious gift. 56. In 880, a similar gift was made by 4 heads of a guild belonging to 360 towns. 57. Such grants may also have been made by the rulers, as was done in the Pala and Pratihara dominions. We do not know whether royal income from tolls and customs was transferred to vassals and officials for their services, but they were certainly granted to temples in return for spiritual benefit. Para. Transfer of royal income from trade and commerce to the religious beneficiaries was a new development in this period. In post-Maurya and Gupta times, deposits in cash were made with the guilds, page 108, and religious needs were met out of the interest accruing on them, so that religious bodies did not enjoy any control over the management of the donated amount. The old practice was continued under the Pratiharas, who, of course, deposited money with the heads of guilds and not the guilds. But what is more important, there also began the practice of transferring tolls levied on sale of commodities or on shops to the temples. Thus, the temples came to wield some control over the economic activities of the artisans and merchants, which they could regulate in their narrow interest. Para. A basic characteristic of feudal economy was local needs locally satisfied, which did not leave scope for specialized production for market. This seems to be true of villages under the Palas and Pratiharas. The Jatakas mention craft villages, but whatever little information we have about the composition of the village population under the Palas suggests that these were not inhabited only by agriculturists, but by all varieties of people from Brahmanas to Medas, Andhras and Chandalas. 58. A Pratihara grant shows that villages near Alwar were populated by artisans, merchants and cultivators. 59. The Pala and Pratihara lists of taxes in the countryside show that they could not possibly be levied from the peasants alone. Only artisans and traders of the village could pay Kara, Hiranya, etc. Thus, for the upkeep of the self-sufficient economy of the village, it was necessary that all sections of primary producers should live in the village. Even the backward tribal people carried on economic activities useful to the village. In the Pala villages, Chandalas may have worked in hide and provided shoes, etc., while the Medas and Andhras probably served as agricultural laborers. Para. Monasteries and temples formed wider economic units. According to the terms of the Nalanda grant of Devapala, 5 villages were given for providing articles for worship, clothing, bedding, food, and medicine of the monks, and the repair of the monastery. 60. There is no reason to think that all these items were met out of the cash rents realized from villagers. In all probability, some villages supplied grain, etc., others cloth, and still others requisite labor for the repair of buildings. Or else every village furnished part of these articles. Whatever might be the nature of the arrangement in detail, page 109, the villages helped sustain the self-sufficient economy of the big monasteries by making various kinds of services available to them. Para. In some temples of Rajasthan under the Pratiharas, self-sufficiency in economic resources was secured by consolidating their holdings in land 61 and ensuring the regular supply of necessary articles from the artisans. We know of oilmen, tailakas, making voluntary gifts of a fixed measure of oil per oil meal to a temple. 62. Other artisans were forcibly attached to the temple to cater for its economic needs. Thus, the local Pratihara governor, Mathanadeva, imposed a tax of 2 palikas from every jar, Ghata Kupaka, of clarified butter and oil, and 50 leaves from every cholika, Collika, for the temple of Lachukeshwara in Rajasthan. 63. Obviously, neither the donor nor the temple possessed sufficient cash for the purpose, and so artisans were compelled to supply a part of their produce to it. Para. Some towns also seem to have been self-sufficient inasmuch as they owned land from which they procured their food. Artisans living in such towns were not quite free to pursue their trades as they wished. Under the Pratiharas, we find the headmen of the oilmen, tailikas, bittle sellers, tambulikas, distillers, Kallapala, and garland makers, Malika Mahara, making endowments and sometimes accepting deposits on behalf of their guilds. 64. Earlier epigraphs represent the whole guild as accepting deposits, but according to the Pratihara epigraphs, this function had developed on the chiefs. In consultation with royal agents, the head of a guild could impose taxes on its members and undertake transactions on its behalf. This shows that in towns, artisans could not function independently but were attached to their chiefs in the same manner as the peasants to their lords in the benefices. This meant lack of mobility, which was an important feature of closed urban economy. Para. Another indication of the existence of local economic units, particularly in the Pratihara dominions, is found in the prevalence of local weights and measures, some of which are mentioned in the Siardoni inscription. It seems that money, tali, and tula were local measures of weight. 65. The Gwalior region, page 110, had its own land measure, which obtained in that area, 66, and the local land measure was determined according to the hand of the emperor, Parameshwarya. 67. We know of local land measures in eastern India under the Guptas and Senas. They also existed under the Palas. Political fragmentation did not favor the evolution of uniform weights and measures, which prevented the development of country-wide trade and commerce. Para. That trade and commerce was not vigorous in the period can be inferred from the diminished use of coins. The only Pala grant which mentions the use of dramas, Drammas, is an inscription of Dharmapala, according to which in 801 a tank was constructed at Gaya at the cost of 3,000 dramas, but no coins can be attributed with any certainty to any Pala king. Recent excavations at a Pala site near Kolgong in Bhagalpur have exposed some cowries but no coins. In view of the continuity of the Pala rule for nearly 4 centuries, scholars find it hard to explain the near absence of coins of their kingdom. 68. But it is not surprising if we bear in mind the general nature of the economy prevalent in early medieval India. Para. The Pratihara inscriptions mention several categories of coins such as dramma, pada, vimsopaka, rupaka, pana, kakini, and kapardaka, 69. Of these, the last was the cowrie, which could not be of much use in considerable transactions. According to Suleiman, Sulaiman, cowries were the medium of exchange in the country of Ruhumi, our capital, Uhmi, and trade was carried through it, 70. The dramma was the only coin capable of undermining the self-sufficient economy of the Pratihara kingdom. Drammas seem to have been in use in Rajasthan in the 7th century. An inscription of 608 from Marwar makes the earliest mention of the dramma, 71. But under the Pratiharas, we do not know of any drammas earlier than the 9th century AD. Refined silver drammas bearing the device of Adi Varaha are attributed to Mihira Bhoja, 836 to 85, and the debased ones are attributed to his two immediate successors, Mahendrapala, 885 to 910, and Bhoj II, 910 to 14, but not with certainty. Recently, some coins of Vinayaka Pala, 914 to 43, grandson of Mihira Bhoja, have been discovered, 72. They came to be known later as Vinayaka Mudra, in contrast to the Varaha Mudra of Bhoja I, page 111, in the Dravya Pariksha of Thakura, Peru, Pheru, 73, which shows that the two varieties were issued in considerable quantity. But the number of coins either two discovered is small. Thus, the literary and epigraphic sources seem to support the hypothesis that the dramma was not used in any appreciable quantity earlier than the 9th century AD. Its use increased only from the 10th century onwards. Moreover, the inscriptions show that the use of the dramma was restricted to towns such as Siadoni. Furthermore, the coins that have been identified as drammas and recovered so far are negligible in number. There are about 200 Adi Varaha and Vigraha Pala coins in the Lucknow Museum, about 20 Adi Varaha coins in silver and copper in the Indian Museum, and a few in the Baroda Museum, 74. These coins in no way compare with the large number of coins from post-Maurya and Gupta times. At any rate, they were not numerous enough to break through the shell of the closed economy prevalent in those times, 75. Para. The fact that no coins can be attributed with certainty to the Palas and very few to the Pratiharas suggests that some coins discovered from this period and others mentioned in the contemporary inscriptions may have been issued by local bodies or groups of merchants who were authorized to do so by their respective rulers. This may be true of the Gadhaya, Gadhaya Paisa, which appeared in Rajasthan possibly in the 10th century and became current in the 11th and 12th centuries. The Panchayaka Dramma, referred to in the Siadoni inscription of the 10th century, is taken by Bhandarkar to mean a coin struck by the local panchayat, 76. That some drammas at local names in earlier times can be inferred from the use of Bhillamala or Srimalia drammas of later times, 77. Thus, the issue of coins of local bodies, towns, or merchants indicates the disintegration of central power and the prevalence of local economic units. Para. Further proof of the use of coins is found in epigraphic references to the purchase of shops. In the Pratihara kingdom, 8 inscriptions ranging from 864 to 904 refer to the purchase of shops for cash made by the management of temples, 78. But during this period, hardly any coin series can be definitely associated with the ruling dynasties of the Palas, 112, Pratiharas and Rashtrakutas, not to speak of minor dynasties, a state of affairs very different from the prevailing in the days of the Indo-Greeks, Kushanas, Satavahanas, Kshatrapas, and above all the Guptas. However, the available coins and the references to them in the Pratihara inscriptions convey the impression that the Pratihara economy was not so closed as its Pala counterpart. There are also some other indications of mobility and economic intercourse. At least at 2 places in the Pratihara kingdom, merchants from different parts of the country gathered, horse dealers at Pehoa and general merchants at Ahar. Moreover, some merchants migrated from place to place. This mobility of merchants must have weakened the feudal economy under the Pratiharas. Para, it is remarkable that not a single Rashtrakuta coin has been discovered so far, although they ruled for over 200 years, although their kingdom touched the sea coast, and although the term Hiranya is repeatedly mentioned in their land charters. Altekar considers this to be a strange phenomenon, 79. But the same is true of the Palas, to whom not a single coin can be ascribed indisputably, in spite of their rule for about 4 centuries. The conspicuous absence of Rashtrakuta coins can be appreciated if we remind ourselves of the nature of medieval economy. The lack of coins has been explained by Altekar himself when he states that land tax in the Rashtrakuta kingdom was mostly paid in kind, as in the Ganga and Chola dominions. Footnote 80, but there's a printing mistake. It shows it as 2. Of course, the Kambe plates of Govinda IV mention a gift of 1400 villages, 600 agraharas and 800 villages, yielding an annual revenue of 7 lakhs of suvarnas, 81. But this is just an estimate of the annual income in terms of money. Probably assessment was made in terms of cash, but collection in kind. Para. The articles handled by the merchants under Palas and Pratiharas were not of day-to-day use, touching the life of the common people. Certainly, trade in horses, betel, etc. could not affect the rural economy. The only important necessity of daily use required by the villagers was salt. The Siadoni inscription leads us to suppose that in the Pratihara kingdom, salt merchants were the most important of all dealers. Page 113. It mentions as many as 7 Nemika, Nemika-vanikas, some credited with the establishment of temples and others with their endowments. If the economy had not been self-sufficient, dealers in grain and cloth would have been more important. Even people living in towns owned land in the neighborhood and probably depended on the produce received from such land. This seems to be true of traders living in Siadoni, 82, and Gwalior, 83. It is a strong indication of the self-sufficient rural economy that of the various kinds of merchants, those dealing in salt appear as the most important under the Pratiharas. The only other important merchants in the Pratihara records are the oilmen or Tailakas, whose presence again reflects a self-sufficient economy. Probably every village did not produce all the oil necessary for cooking and lighting, which had to be supplied by the oilmen. Para. To conclude, we can sum up four broad developments in early medieval economy. 1. Growth of individual ownership of land at the cost of royal and communal worship. 2. Subjection of peasantry through sub-infeudation, eviction, and imposition of non-customary taxes and forced labor. 3. Conversion of income from trade and crafts into benefices. And finally, 4. The existence of a self-sufficient economy, but traced by lesser use of coins and comparative absence of trade. All these may be regarded as features of feudal economy under the Palas, Rashtrakutas, and Pratiharas. Of these, the existence of intermediaries in land, whose number increased enormously during this period, may be regarded an old feudal phenomenon. The same is true of the subjection of peasantry through various processes, with the difference that subleasing, eviction, and forced labor were intensified in Rajasthan, Gujarat, and Maharashtra. These processes, backed by religious propaganda carried on by the beneficiaries, were in the nature of extra-economic methods employed for the exploitation of the peasantry, which started in the earlier period. But the loss of agrarian and communal rights by the villagers, leading to the growth of individual rights in land, feudalization of crafts and commerce, and paucity of coins appear to have been new traits in the economy of the period. Some of the developments, page 114, especially the growth of individual rights in land, can be better appreciated if we examine the legal basis of land grants in early medieval times. Next section, notes and references.